اوكي، هنبدأ دلوقتي صح؟
Yeah.
اوكي. طيب انا ممكن بس أبدأ باني اعرف الدكتور واعرفك وبعدين نبتدي على طول.
Okay.
الكاميرا. اوكي. Honored guests from around the world, welcome to the first session of Life and Humanity Across Cultures, presented by Oasis Psychology Creations through the Cross Culture Exchange Club. Before we begin, I'd like to kindly let you know that this session will be recorded and may be shared on our official platforms for educational and community purposes. So, by attending today, you are kindly giving your consent for this recording. Thank you so much for your understanding and support. Allow me briefly introduce myself. My name is Yosra Morsy. I'm the founder and CEO of Oasis Psychology Creations and the founder of the Cross Culture Exchange Club. I'm also PhD student in clinical psychology, certified psychotherapist from different countries, and international speaker. I want to introduce also Oasis Psychology Creations is a global platform focused on community well-being, mental health, innovation, and creation. Through our work, we aim to create meaningful spaces where participants explore how psychology, culture, and the human experience intersect. The object of each session is to foster understanding, personal growth, and dialogue. So today we honored to welcome our first guest. Dr. Jacquelyn Berry is a cognitive scientist and a former Fulbright United States scholar. Her work focuses on learning, cognition, and human-computer interaction. In 2019, Dr. Berry joined the American University in Cairo as a Fulbright scholar, studying how Arabic English bilinguals switch between languages and opening Egypt's first experimental psychology laboratory. Dr. Berry is the first psychologist in Egypt to study cognition with eye tracking technology, a founding member of AI for Africa, and an international speaker at platforms such as the United Nations in Geneva on technology and language. Alongside her academic work, Dr. Berry is a wife, mother. She values family life and believes in balancing work, learning, and human connection. So today we are honored to learn from Dr. Berry's professional journey and her cross-culture experience. Dr. Berry, we are very honored to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very
Our
much. I'm
session,
delighted to be here as your first guest. I hope you guys can hear me okay.
yes, we can hear you well. Our session today will be moderated by Miss Malak. Malak is upcoming master's student with a bachelor's degree in psychology from Coventry University, and she completed clinical psychology training in Egypt and recently began practicing as a psychologist under training, passionate about fostering personal growth and self-understanding. Today, Malak will guide our conversation with Dr. Berry and support a thoughtful and meaningful dialogue. Thank you all for joining us today for a meaningful conversation on culture, and your presence truly reflects the spirit of this club. I will now leave the conversation in hands of our moderator, Malak, and our guest, Dr. Jacquelyn. And thank you so much again. I hope you enjoying the session.
Thank you, Yosra, and thank you, Dr. Jackie, for joining us. I'm very, very honored, and I'm very excited to learn more from you. I'm sure we're very excited to learn more about your experience, and also we welcome you to Egypt, as most of us here are Egyptian.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited to be here. I'm actually in the moment in the middle of really big snow back in New York in the United States, which is why I've got a New York skyline. I happen to live not in the city of New York. I live in the countryside. But yes, it is very, very cold. We received 55 centimeters of snow.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, it's a lot.
a lot of snow.
Yeah.
Well, drink lots of hot chocolate and hot drinks.
Exactly.
Yeah. But we're really glad to have you with us. You are an inspiration. I've seen and I've heard so much about you. And you really are an inspiration, and I think you make a very great asset to the cross-cultural experience, to the cross-cultural club, especially since we're just starting. So we're starting off very strong. So thank you so much. I myself, I wasn't born here, and I spent half of my life, or most of my life actually, outside of Egypt. I lived in Kuwait. So, to me, cultural experiences and cultural values, I've learned so much about it. Um, and I've studied also in a school where I've seen very many people, diversity was big. So I have some knowledge on cultural values, but I want to leave the mic to you. I want to know your experience. I want to know your thoughts. So to begin with, can you please tell me what does culture mean to you? As someone who is from America, who's lived in Egypt. So I'm sure you've seen a lot. So tell me exactly what does it mean to you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for having me. And I appreciate that you too have had a cross-cultural experience, and maybe we can share notes someday. So from my perspective, I, as an individual, feel like culture is how we represent ourselves in the world. And it's really what shapes and defines how we interact with other people. So in my mind, culture isn't something that lives in the head.
Hmm.
Culture is something that lives in the heart, but is shared with other people, right? So it's a knowing, it's a form of camaraderie. And so, in my view, while this changes from one culture to another, for the most part, it's pretty easy to adapt to another culture. So, I lived in Egypt for about 5 years. And of that 5 years, I only felt like I was really new to the culture for maybe the first 5 weeks. It was fairly quickly to adapt, even though it was very different than what I was accustomed to. And so I think people put an overemphasis on cultural differences and spend less time thinking about, hey, how easy it is to actually, adapt when you're in a different culture. I
Hmm.
also, as a psychologist, feel like, we also need to take people's culture into consideration when we are looking at their personal experience. So whatever it could be, and we all know there's many branches of psychology, so I, won't get into the specifics of, things like treatment and interventions, but just generally speaking, when you're communicating with someone, whether you're teaching a class or you're doing research or you're administering treatment or therapy or medicine or intervention or whatever it is, keep in mind people's culture, because that is going to inform their willingness to interact with you and engage in with you in a way that will help them learn, be part of research, accept some treatment, accept some intervention, and so forth. So that's my take on culture.
That's very interesting. That's a very interesting perspective, and thank you for sharing it with us. Um, When you say, because I've had a different experience, or I guess I learned it in my years of studying in university. So when you talk about how you think it's easier, and in your experience, you said that it was very easy for you to adapt to the culture, which I'm very glad about, and I'm very proud of you for doing that. Um, can you elaborate more on that? And can you elaborate on how you think that this could be applied every like around the world?
Absolutely. So I think the most important thing, and so as you just pointed out, I did adapt to the culture. And as I said, I adapt to the culture. That doesn't mean I was fluent in speaking Egyptian Arabic. I did the best I could to try to interact with people. But, 9 times out of 10, it was me piecing words together to try to get something that I want, whether I was in a restaurant or a store or in an Uber or wherever I was.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most important thing, and this applies to really anyone who's trying to interact with any culture, start with respect, right? I did not go into any situation thinking, okay, what, how come you don't understand where I'm coming from? Why is this not exactly the way I'm used to? Why are these differences existing? That's the wrong starting point. I think the better starting point is to start with a tone of respect and
Mhm.
appreciation for the differences, because those differences are really what make things interesting, right? Like, why would you go to another country, whether it was for, a 5-day vacation or to live there for 5 years, if you wanted it to be exactly like the country that you came from? Well, that doesn't seem like a very interesting experience. So you have to have those differences. And
Mhm.
so it's appreciating those differences and recognizing those differences and having respect for the person who's in front of you, and ultimately saying, listen, we have these cultural differences, but how can we work together to bridge the gap so that we can understand one another and reach whatever mutual goal we're trying to reach? Again, I'm in a store, you're trying to make a sale, and I'm trying to buy something. We both want the same thing. Let's just get there.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, so how do you think when you talk about respect? Because I feel like I don't think, yani, studying insight, like as a psychologist, I don't think that people aren't respectful. I think they just have different ways of showing it. And it's very hard to notice these things because we all have different perspectives, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's very, very hard for us to kind of understand a person's cues in what they call respect. So sometimes we tend to interpret that this person is being disrespectful when really this is their only way of showing that they are being respectful. So, from your experience and as a licensed psychologist, how do you think that as a community we can respect other people from other cultures more? Like in the sense of like how can we really show it to them so that they can understand it?
Yeah. Well, so I think that comes from education. So there's two parts of it. The first thing is I think it comes from education, which is if you are going to interact with someone from another culture, it could be a client, it could be a colleague or a peer, or it could just be someone on the street. Do some research in advance and understand what defines respect in that culture, right? So gone are the days. My grandfather, for example, he did a lot of diplomatic work overseas. And this was back before you had a lot of information before going there. Now, with AI and the internet, you can find out almost everything you need to know about a culture or a location or even a person or an individual or a subculture or a family before you even get there. So do some research and understand what represents respect in their culture. Like if you're really interested in actually showing respect, then you'll have the respect of giving them the time to take into consideration how they want to receive respect.
Mhm.
So, educating oneself in advance what it means to actually show respect. That's the first thing. Second thing, it comes down to the language. Learn the word for respect. Learn the phrase, right? So, like, we learn basic things when we travel to other cultures: hello, goodbye, food, eat, go, sleep, just things to get through the day. I would recommend every single person, whether they're going to the United States or Kuwait or, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, wherever they're going, learn how to say, I want to give you respect. And start any interaction with that,
Mhm.
because that way the person can cover anything that you do and say within you leading it with that. So if you lead with, I want to give you respect, then they won't take any offense, even if you do make a mistake and you do something that is not interpreted properly.
That is a very, very strong point, actually. And I agree. I think that's a good way of showing respect because I feel like we're being direct with them. Um, and we're showing vulnerability at the same time. And I think the problem is in this generation is that vulnerability is seen as a weakness. We don't like showing it. And I feel like when we do show it, we're either judged and I feel like judgment isn't because they want to judge us. I just feel like it's used as a coping mechanism. So because it's used as a coping mechanism, people start projecting and they're like, "Oh, it's you." So this is actually a really good point that you make. And you talked about in the beginning how before anyone enters the country, we should educate ourselves on the wherever we're going. So when you say this, because I feel like this is also not yani it's a bit overwhelming to some people because they don't know where to start. So as a psychologist, what do you recommend so that in case any one of us goes to a different country and we don't know how to we don't know how to communicate, what do you recommend exactly so that we're able to not necessarily fit in, but communicate better with the community?
Right. So, I mean, I guess one of the things I'd recommend, probably the first thing, is watching maybe videos on YouTube.
Hmm.
So, and I'm thinking, and it's a good thing that you said as a psychologist, because my initial thought was, well, just like when you get a visa, you have to go to the embassy, and you have to go to the website. Oftentimes, they will give you information about how you should behave, and how you should exist in another country. But as a psychologist, if you really want to get to the heart of the matter, because again, I believe that heart is something, culture is something that lives in our heart, and this is shared between people. Think about ways in which people express culture. So it's often through food, eating together. It's often through entertainment. It's in the ways that they, kind of relax and interact. It's in sports. And so, what I would recommend is doing some internet research, specifically going to YouTube and finding videos of, what are the customs when people are eating, and where do people go, right? So, like the first time I heard of the koshery place, Abu Tarek, it was actually a video about this wonderful koshery place in Egypt. And I was like, oh, I should go there. And I don't remember if I mean, I went obviously more than once, but I don't remember if I had gone before I'd seen this video or not. But it was great because it was like, okay, so that gave me a really good reference point. And so now, even after the fact, I regularly get in my feed pictures and videos of famous people who go to the same restaurant. And I'm like, yeah, okay, so, this is kind of a good reference point. But this gives people a good idea of the custom. Look at a video about I don't know, their customs for wine or something like that. So speaking of wine, I was watching a video about France and French people and how they eat. I have relatives that live in France. And I was looking and I saw that their practices around eating, and it was also, they're speaking in French, but I don't, like it was being described in English. Their practices around eating are very different than American practices around eating. And it's like, okay, so now this is giving me in advance information about how I should prepare if I get to a special dinner or invited someplace where I'm having a community event or something like that. Learn all of these things as much as you can in advance. And
Hmm.
so I'm just going to recommend starting with things that people use to share culture.
Hmm.
Food is probably the biggest one of them. And
Hmm.
entertainment is probably the second biggest one. What music, what songs, who are people listening to? And then third is probably sports. What sports teams are people invested in? Learn about how, and then you at least have something to talk about. So even if you are not, like if you're in a casual situation and you're not talking about something related to psychology, you can ask them their opinion about, a certain sports league or a certain sports star. You don't have to be an expert on the topic, but it gives them the respect, going back to the idea of respect, of showing that you're interested in what they are interested in.
Yeah. Okay. So in the sense of like when you talk about this, and also, yeah, thanks for mentioning the Kushri place. It's a really good place. And I agree with the sense of this is a good starting point in the sense of um the food, for example. That's a really good way of kind of engaging with the community because also when we travel or when we go to any other place, the first thing we talk about is food or we look at is what are the good places to eat. So that's a really good point that you made, and I thank you for making it. And also, since you're from America and since you live now here in Egypt, tell me more about the differences that you see between the Egyptian culture, especially since you're a professor at AUC. So tell us more about the experiences between the Egyptian culture and then America.
Right. Well, so there's the most obvious difference, the one that everyone talks about when they go to Egypt, which is trying to understand the traffic patterns. That was a little bit of a shock to me. It's like, oh my goodness, like I don't necessarily know what's going on when people drive. But once I got used to the system and how it works, it was like, oh, okay, so this is just the way driving happens here. So that was probably the biggest cultural difference to me because that's the one that you see as soon as you leave the airport. Like you haven't even spoken to anyone yet. You're just leaving the airport and you see that the traffic patterns are different.
Mhm,
That's one thing. Another difference is I feel like Americans tend to be more private. And I don't really know how to explain that other than, and this could not just be between Egypt and America, but also America and other countries, I've noticed. Americans tend to be more secretive about certain things. I remember having a conversation with a Chinese woman some years ago, and her saying, "Yeah, well, in China, we just say what our age is. Like it's not a big deal. Like, I'm such and such age. Whereas in the United States, it's some big secret. Like no one ever says their age. And even like on your Facebook profile, you have the option of hiding the year that you were born, which, like a lot of people do. Some people do say their age and they don't care, but that's something that's more common that people keep secret.
mhm,
So Americans, in my opinion, seem to value privacy a lot more than Egyptians, and maybe other people too, but certainly than Egyptians. I also find that Egyptians are more likely to give people the benefit of the doubt. So what that means is if someone is in a situation and they behave in a certain way, Egyptians are more likely to understand that the environment and the context is what precipitated that behavior or caused that behavior. So they're not just acting in a vacuum in a way that's, good or bad, negative or positive. It's just something has led them to behave in some way. This is not the case in America. The United States is much different in the sense that you own your behavior, right? If you do something that is perceived as good or bad, then this is attributed only to you. And so if you do something and let's say it's not perceived as good, there's nobody to blame but you. Whereas in Egypt, people understand that circumstances are beyond people's control sometimes. Not everything is predictable and categorical. And so I'm not going to put you in a box called everything you've ever done is your blame or is your fault because I understand that there are circumstances that could be beyond your control. So in my experience, particularly as a psychologist, I felt like that was a major difference.
yeah. That's really shocking because I thought, yeah, I could admit that here in Egypt it's very I feel like here in Egypt there's a big gap between discipline and just doing whatever you want without any consequences. And I think because in Egypt there are different people. Like there's I don't know if you heard about the stereotype, but there's like Egypt and Masr, which is like the it's a different side of Egypt in general.
Yep.
So I thought like it's very interesting because I feel like also yeah, here in Egypt we're very bent on experience. Like we experience different things and different situations, which I think might shape the not necessarily our culture, but our perspectives. So I feel like when we communicate, like for example, someone who lived her most of her life or studied at an international school and then studied as doing her bachelor's and master's at an international university, um, for example, communicates with someone who is the lifestyle is a bit different. So to me, especially as a psychologist, as I observe these things with my clients, I feel like it's the lifestyle in general is what makes them kind of I feel like we're more empathetic in this sense, but at the same time, um we get frustrated with it, but there's more empathy. So So when we see someone that, has a weird behavior and we're like, oh, it's because you're from Masr, which is the other side of Egypt. So we kind of empathize on that, even though the empathy is not that high, but there is some sort of empathy. Meanwhile, in America, this is a very interesting point that you brought where if someone kind of does something, they kind of, I feel like it's more strict. It's like, it's more of what we call in psychology, the critical parent.
I
So,
would, yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely, you make a mistake, there's no excuses, right? Like you have done something wrong. The
mm-hmm,
end. And if something caused you to be this way, it doesn't matter, right? You're supposed to figure out how to own it and move past it and
yeah,
not let it affect anything else going forward. And so
yeah,
that is a huge cultural difference. And as a psychologist, this is something that is um, pretty basic to cultural psychology in the sense that depending on the culture that someone lives in, whether or not the focus is on, an individual versus on the group, that can have an impact on whether or not someone is solely responsible for their actions
yeah,
or the environment can be the cause of their actions. And I think the part of it is in the United States when people do things that are really, really good, really, really amazing, they want to get all the credit, right? So, yes, I accomplished whatever this, or I did that, or I did that. And, maybe like, let's just take something like the Olympics. The Olympic Games are actually coming up in a few weeks now. Sometimes people will say, thanks to my mom, thanks to my parents, thanks to my coach. But a lot of times the focus is just on them. And so I think the flip side of that is on the one hand, well, yeah, I have to own every single thing that I do that I wasn't supposed to do. But on the other hand, I want all of the credit and I want all of the appreciation if I do something good. And
mhm,
so that's where it's kind of, it's like, well, if I'm going to get credit for everything good that happens, then I also have to take the blame for everything bad and vice versa.
yeah. Interesting. That's
Yeah.
that. I feel like it's very harsh. It's
It
like
is. Oh,
this.
it is harsh. It is harsh. Make no mistake. And we know it's harsh, but I mean, it's just kind of, the
And
way it is. Like you did this. Nothing caused you to do it. You chose to do this.
mm-hmm. So has this ever conflicted with your beliefs? Because psychologists, like I think you know that as psychologists, we're very not friendly, but we don't judge. And we see a lot of clients that kind of, make mistakes and they have different cultural beliefs and stuff, which I think sometimes may not coincide, but actually conflict with our cultural beliefs. So as a psychologist, seeing this and then living in America and, having to observe that, um, do you feel like how does this shape you as a psychologist today?
Yeah, so because I'm aware of it, I try to do the best that I can to be understanding of other people. And to be clear, living in Egypt certainly helped with that, right? Like when you see it represented, again, 5 years is a long time,
Yeah.
people over and over and over again, accepting that other people have influences, other people have driving forces, other people have pressure that they're experiencing and they have to, still respond and live and kind of be who they are. That gives you your own kind of empathy.
Yeah.
um, so that the combination of living in Egypt and also knowing that this is how Americans are versus other people in the world, including Egypt, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt more often.
Yeah.
But I do have to make an effort to do so because that's not how the culture works here.
Yeah.
So, but I'm much better. So like, I have students who come to me and, they're explaining something that happened in their family and maybe they need help with a project or they need more time or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And, me being me and understanding, things are the way they are, and also understanding that people really do want to do the best that they can. I
Yeah,
tend to be very approachable as a professor, and I tend to be much more likely, I think, than many other professors to kind of give my students the benefit of the doubt. So I
yeah,
tend to be relatively lenient in my policies, just because I know that other people are dealing with their own constraints.
mm-hmm,
So the danger for me is to be too lenient, when there are times when people really need to be, like held accountable for their behavior. So it's a
mm-hmm.
balancing act, that's for sure.
And do you feel like you're more lenient, or do you feel like there's a balance?
I feel like I'm more lenient.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I can kind of assume.
Yeah, I
Okay.
feel like I'm more lenient.
And in terms of lenient, like how what because I feel like sometimes that may conflict with patient levels and what you're able to tolerate.
Yeah.
So how are you like in what ways or what techniques do you use that make you lenient?
Right. So most of my experience is with students because, I don't spend a lot of time with clinical patients. I spend more time doing research about clinical patients and then passing that on to my partner in Australia who actually deals with patients on the ground.
Mhm.
But basically, what that comes down to is accepting that even when someone is trying, that doesn't mean that, and they're not successful, that doesn't mean that they're not trying. Not everyone has the tools readily
Mhm.
accessible to them to be able to, instantly make a change in their life or instantly make a change in their thinking or their behavior or something like that. So
Yeah.
I think as psychologists, whether you're a professor or a practitioner,
Mhm.
you're expecting the people that you interact with, once you give them the knowledge that they need, it should be like a light switch. Okay, so now like get better, do what you know you're supposed to do, but things are more gradual, right? People aren't just snapping their fingers and instantly doing everything that they should have been doing all along. So
Yeah.
recognizing that it's a process and that it is gradual and being forgiving of that. So yeah, it's really being forgiving people of their imperfections. You might not like their imperfections. You might feel like they are wasting their time, but
Mhm.
that's their business. That's their journey. Your job is to guide them and help them and coach them and to facilitate their learning and their processes. But at the end of the day, they have to take responsibility for, whatever it is they're trying to do, whether it's getting an A in the class or learning to deal with and overcome some psychological problem they're having.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think patience is it's hard to do, but I feel like it's very important and I think it needs to be emphasized more and a lot because I feel like the thing is that we focus too much on our capacity level, what we can handle and what we can't handle. So I think that sometimes I don't want to say that we're selfish because I don't really think that's the case, but we respect our boundaries instead of empathizing that this person might be struggling or without like having the awareness that this person needs support even though they're not showing it or they're showing it with the struggles that you see
Yeah.
either as a psychologist or even as a human.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that needs to be more in the light.
Yeah.
um but yeah. Okay, so what do you think feels universal regardless of the country?
Oh, I think when we share experiences that create a lot of emotion, I feel like that transcends culture. I feel like it even transcends language.
Mm,
Um, so yes, we have different ways of interacting. We have different ways of uh having or showing the values that we have, and we have different ways of um, showing that we appreciate people in our culture. But I feel like when we get together and there's a shared emotional experience, whether it's very positive or very negative. Ideally, you would want it to be more positive than negative, but either or, that camaraderie is really what creates kind of this universal, we're just all human beings on this planet called Earth, and we
Yeah.
need to, behave accordingly. So I'll share a personal example. Um, a few years ago, my husband and me and my son were we were out at a mall or something, and we had finished eating, and we were heading back, and we were in like some mall, and we were heading back to the New Cairo, where the American University in Cairo was. And so it had
Mm-hmm.
rained, which was had made the roads very slippery. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is, obviously doesn't happen a lot in Egypt. And the Uber driver that we had, like the Uber driver was sitting in the front, my husband was sitting next to him, and me and my son are sitting in the back. And
Mm-hmm.
so it had rained, but the Uber driver, we're just going home. It's not really a big deal. He didn't speak any English at all, like none whatsoever. And so he basically stayed silent for the entire ride, which makes sense. There's not really anything to talk about. And my husband doesn't speak any Arabic. Like, I think he can maybe ask for water when we go into a restaurant, and like that's it. He, has no um, Arabic skills whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So we're turning this corner, it's one of those things where you have to go around and then go straight. So we're making the U-turn on the road, and in front of us there was someone on a motorbike, and they were like delivering something, I don't know, and something had happened, and the motorbike slipped because the ground was wet, and it slipped
Oh.
from underneath them, and they
Mm-hmm.
kind of landed really, really hard on their side. Now
Mm-hmm.
they were mostly okay because they didn't get hit by another car or anything like that, but they still landed and hit really hard. The Uber driver, who never even smiled at us, by the way,
Yeah.
the Uber driver instantly pulled over, and without ever speaking, simultaneously, my husband and the Uber driver got out of the car. They went over, they picked the man up off the street. My husband picked up the bike, moved it off to the side. They picked up the man, they put him on the side of the road. They made sure that he was okay. And then they got back in the Uber, closed the door, and then they were on their way. Not a
Oh,
single word was spoken. But
okay.
there was that mutual cultural understanding of empathy, which is this is somebody who's in trouble and needs help. We all know this. We
Mm-hmm.
all know this situation. And so without even thinking, right? It's not like, the Uber driver kept going or my husband stayed in the car and watched. They both instantly knew, oh, we have to stop and help this guy. And they stopped, picked the man up off the street. Nobody speaking anything because nobody understands what anybody's saying, made sure he was okay, and then they left.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And so that to me really kind of represents universality when it comes to culture, because it's this shared empathy that they had in that situation.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting point because I feel like sometimes I don't know if it's ignorance or just people are rude, but there are sometimes that the empathy or just the common sense is a bit difficult to understand. Like sometimes I feel like not exactly in this situation, but maybe in like situations where there's someone that is in need of, say, for example, food. Like we see a lot of this in Egypt, especially, and I'm sure we see this a lot in the US and in other places in the world. So sometimes I feel like when you have someone begging or you see someone that is struggling, they don't ask for anything, but you can kind of tell that they're struggling. I feel like sometimes there is this kind of sort of ignorance. I don't know if there is like a sense of understanding, but there is this some sort of ignorance that kind of pushes people away,
Mhm.
regardless of the culture, that to actually help. And I feel like there is some sort of assumption that's like, oh, like this guy, yeah, it was his choice, it's his fault that he's like this, rather than this guy is going through a hard time. Um, so maybe I should help him because even the tiniest thing can can make like such a big difference. So I feel like sometimes do you recommend a way that people can be more empathetic? Because I feel like sometimes maybe it's just a lack of understanding, which can lead to a lack of empathy.
Yeah, so that's really tough. That's really tough, right?
Mhm.
Because some people are just naturally going to be more empathetic than others. So, for example, my son is extremely empathetic. I
Mhm.
don't know why, but when he was, very little, um, if somebody, so for example, the when he was in nursery school, the teachers would always say they never know who got hurt because he would be crying with them.
Yeah.
So they would walk over and, like, let's say some kid, I don't know, hurt their finger or something, and they would be crying, and then he would go over and stand next to them and he would cry also. Because he, like, appreciates other people's pain in a way that, quite frankly, I don't. Not on that level, right? Not on the same level. And so he very much picks up on the emotions around him and whatever else. And I feel like that's something natural. I feel like that's something that, for the most part, I mean, I haven't looked at the literature on it, but for the most part, that's inborn.
Yeah.
Um, you tend to be either empathetic or not empathetic. That being said, they do have something called, sensitivity training, and there's also something to be said for exposure. So
Mhm.
there are ways that they can get people to mimic what it feels like to have a learning disability.
Yeah.
And so when they're experiencing that situation and then someone points out that they are not, reading something properly or counting something properly or whatever it is, then it's suddenly like, okay, now I know what that feels like. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, without replicating or, coming very close to giving someone that same issue, it's really, really, really hard to introduce empathy. Someone has to make a choice to
Yeah.
put themselves in someone else's shoes. And we have to ask people, as
Yeah.
psychologists, to constantly make that choice.
Hmm.
They constantly have to make that decision. Otherwise, yes, it is too easy to turn a blind eye, be cruel, be misunderstanding, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it is a challenge, but I feel like if we can do it as psychologists and we go through a lot, I feel like anyone can. I just feel like it needs awareness.
Yeah, I would
Awareness
agree with
of
that.
awareness of themselves that okay, I'm not being the most empathetic person right now, so maybe I should work on this. So from this, do you have kind of like tips of like on both ends really of how we can kind of empathize with each other for the people that actually may be struggling? And also adding to this, do you like what do you believe people on both ends are quietly searching for? Because I feel
Mm.
like communication is verbal communication isn't really shown a lot, but I feel like the non-verbal communication is very um it's very out there, but we can't see it. So I think that's what causes these cross-cultural clashes. So what do you think about this?
Yeah. Okay. So two separate, I guess, responses. The first one regarding to how people can actually do this. This is where I think really Egyptians have the advantage because, as I said before, Egyptians are much more likely to recognize that people's circumstances and environment are putting pressure on them in a way that's causing them to behave in a certain way.
Yeah,
And as an American, our culture doesn't automatically recognize that.
yeah,
And so, if you see someone, even just the expression on their face, how they're
yeah.
behaving, what are they doing?
Hmm.
Uh, Recognize the unseen forces that are impacting their behavior. You don't know what they feel like, right? Maybe they have a sore tooth,
Yeah,
right? Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're worried about their grandmother that's in a hospital. Like there's any number of things. And
yeah,
so the natural talent that Egyptians have of giving people the benefit of the doubt and recognizing that external forces are causing them pressure, recognizing and then realizing, okay, so then this also can probably allow me to understand that it must be hard for them to to do the things that they do, right? So you were talking about ignoring people who are begging or something like that. They
Yeah.
don't want to be begging, right? It's
Yeah.
probably hard for them to put aside their pride. I'm sure they're no less prideful than anyone else,
Yeah.
to put aside their pride, but they have to feed their child. They have
Yeah.
to feed their family, right? And so it's like, I'm going to suffer and let you look down on me because getting the food or the money to give to my family is more important.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is using that inherent Egyptian advantage of seeing the full picture and using that to recognize people in whatever circumstance needs understanding.
Hmm.
As far as what people are searching for, I think there's a general, and this is across culture, so United States and Egypt, and
Hmm.
probably other cultures too, but we're just talking about those two right now.
Yeah.
Um, a higher purpose,
Yeah.
right? I think people want a higher meaning in their lives.
For sure.
So,
Yeah.
yes, you want to go to work. Yes, you want to take care of your family. You want to have enough to eat. You want to have nice clothes. You want to have a nice watch. You want to live someplace that is safe
Hmm.
and acceptable. But once all that's figured out, if it's all figured out, then people want to be able to say that they are making an impact in the world or an impact in their community or an impact among the people in their own subculture. And they want
Yeah.
to say, hey, we have kind of like this, collective goal to move forward. So I'm sure you guys at Oasis have the goal of moving forward psychology in Egypt by
Yeah.
providing certain services and doing things somewhat differently than maybe other psychological clinics in Egypt, right? So you have this
Exactly.
higher purpose, my needs are met. I'm not hungry. I'm not thirsty. I have enough rest. I have a safe place to live. All right, now how am I going to take this and get meaning in my life? So
Hmm.
that's what I think people are searching for. They're searching for that higher purpose and meaning that's really going to drive them to get more than just the physical basics out of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think I think that yeah, I feel like all of us are trying to find meaning, but we don't really communicate that. Or we do, but just not in the right way, or not in the way I guess that people are able to understand it. So, in terms of actual direct verbal communication, what do you recommend we can do to kind of build the community based on your experience?
Um, to build the community, do you mean build the community of psychologists or build a community of people seeking a common purpose?
People seeking a common purpose.
Okay. So I think that goes back to something you said earlier, which is people look down upon vulnerability.
Mm,
And this is true, right? But anyone who's had any type of real experience in the world understands that sometimes vulnerability is strength, right?
yeah.
Sometimes when you're handing over a weakness, a failure, something that you are ashamed of, whatever, and you're just putting it out there, then you take the power out of it, right? Like while you're trying to hide something, you don't want people to know, it's shameful. You're just putting it out there. So, um, I think that if people are willing to be vulnerable about the things that are valuable, important to them, they will
Yeah.
find other people with the same values and things also being important to them.
Yeah.
And then now that you have both shared a part of yourself that is maybe normally hidden,
Mm-hmm.
now you have something from which to build a community, which is, I don't know why I have this passion, or I don't know why I have this desire or this need, but by being vulnerable, have found that other people have the same. Let's build a community around filling that need. So I think it really comes from being vulnerable and letting other people know that, this desire, this higher purpose exists, and then being able to point to how to get it. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can't do it by yourself. So you have to have a community. And so the
Yeah.
community will form around whatever that higher purpose is once it's shared from a point of vulnerability.
Yeah. This is your friendly reminder, guys, that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's actually a call for connection. Okay. The last thing that to kind of close off this talk before people start asking questions. Um, if culture was a story, what chapter are you currently living in?
Well, I hope I'm at the beginning.
Okay.
So I don't actually know because I can't predict the future. But I'd like to think that there's many more cultures that I can explore, and there's many more cultures, here in the United States or in Egypt or any place, because there's also cultures within cultures. And
Mm,
so it's never just a matter of, this is the nation or this is the
yeah.
country. There's
Yeah.
sub layers.
Hmm.
So I hope I'm at the beginning, to be honest with you, and I have the opportunity to explore hundreds of more different cultures.
Of course. Please let us know on your ex about your experience when you do this.
I will.
Um, okay. So what message would you like listeners from basically us, what message would you kind of put out there for us to kind of take with us wherever we go?
Um, Vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
and respect.
Mm.
I think you would be surprised how much people will respect you when you are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? People are so afraid of being judged. They're so afraid of being, shamed or othered or disregarded. I think it's the opposite. When you have that mutual human connection and everyone knows that everyone else is not
Yeah.
perfect and you're vulnerable about the things that don't make you
Mm.
perfect, then this can lead to more meaningful and respectful communications. And
Yeah.
then when it comes to going to another culture or interacting with someone from another culture, lead with respect. Like I said, lead with I respect you and I'm trying to give you respect. Now, how do we get there in whatever shared way we can figure it out?
Yeah.
So, vulnerability first, respect second.
Okay. That's a good ending advice. That's really, really, really helpful. So thank you so much for your input. And thank you so much for your experience in general. I've learned so much and I hope the audience has. Um, if you guys now I'm gonna leave the room for the audience to ask any questions. If you guys have any questions, please leave it on the chat. The chat box is open. So type your questions right now so that I can share it with Dr. Jackie. Okay. So Aya's asking, do you think in order to assimilate into a new culture, you'd have to lose a part of yourself? She would like to know your personal experience.
So, I'm going to say yes and no. And the reason I say yes and no is because yes, but any part you're losing probably already needed to go. So if there was a part of you that was, irritated and judgmental and you bring that to a new culture and it doesn't work, that had to go anyway, right? So yeah, you need to lose that part of yourself to assimilate to a new culture.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're gaining, right? So you're not actually losing anything, you're just replacing.
Mm-hmm.
What you're gaining is sensitivity, you're gaining awareness, you're gaining just so much perspective on the human experience. And that can only be better for you going forward, right? Because that will now inform all of your future interactions and all your future engagements with other people. So,
Mm-hmm.
yes, but probably something bad. And no, because you're actually replacing it or gaining something else in its place.
Mm. How do we kind of realize this though? How do we realize that the thing that we're losing is bad? Because sometimes I feel like when we lose something, we feel upset. So how do we kind of tell the difference, or how do we kind of seek acceptance in these situations?
Because if it doesn't help you and
Mm-hmm.
only hurts you, then it's bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if somehow, and there are things that help you at different points in your life. I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but there are things, personality characteristics that help you, and then you grow out of them, and then that doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of have to graduate. So let's say you're a child and you suck your thumb or your finger or something like this, like children do.
Yeah.
And it's great if it helps you, get through a night if you're scared of monsters under your bed or you need comfort or whatever else. That's great. But by the time you are, in school, you should stop doing that, right? And so that's because sucking your thumb is no longer helping you. And it's the same thing with anything else. You can have some type of personality characteristic or flaw, and it helps you up to a point, and then life will kind of gradually move you in the direction of shedding all of those unnecessary components.
Yeah.
So if you have to shed any of those unnecessary components to reach a new level of, awareness and understanding, cultural awareness and understanding, then that's how you know that it needed to go because it's not serving you anymore.
Yeah. But how do we know it's unnecessary? Do you think it's something
Because it
that
doesn't help you anymore, right? So like it might be a source of, maybe so like I'm trying to think of a good example. If it causes more harm than good,
Ooh,
is
yeah.
probably the best. If it causes more harm to good, if you can think of situations where it didn't work and you can think of situations where it did work, but it starts to get to a point
Mm-hmm.
where most of it, most of the time it didn't work, then it's time for it to go.
Mm-hmm. That that's a very important note that we should all take care of actually.
Yeah.
Okay, I think everyone is thanking you for joining us today. Oh, Abdul Karim has a question. Um, he says, can cultural exposure ever be hindering rather than benefiting? I am asking this question with an image of hyperindulgence in mind and wondering whether that is applicable to exposing oneself to various different cultures. And this will be the last question before we have to kind of end the talk.
Um, that's a really good question. Can cultural exposure be hindering rather than benefiting? I'm sure there are circumstances when it can be, in which case, all right, so let me think about the second part of your question. Hyperindulgence in mind and wondering whether that is applicable to exposing oneself to various cultures. So, okay. So, I think I understand your question, um, Abdul Karim, and assuming I understand your question properly, I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that hyperindulgence means that you are now ignoring responsibilities that are back home in your own culture, or that you are escaping from, then yes, it's hindering. So if you have some issue that you need to deal with in your home country or some thing that's unresolved that you need to come to terms with, then you need to come to terms with it, because you can run away and immerse yourself in another culture. And that's great because you're learning and you're growing and you're doing things in another culture that's giving you a new perspective. But that didn't change the problem that you were having back home. So
Mhm.
it's like anything else, right? If there's a problem with a person or a situation, a better bet is to try to resolve that problem rather than escaping it and diving in deeply so much into something else that you pretend that it's not even there and are basically ignoring it. So, yes, I do agree that cultural experience exposure can be hindering if it is on the hyper end of the spectrum. The person is basically just like in it completely and ignoring other responsibilities that they have.
Mhm. That's a very, very great insight. Um, okay, this has come to an end. This talk has unfortunately come to an end. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Jackie, for taking the time to come and share some very, very insightful information and information I'm sure we're going to carry throughout our sessions with future clients, throughout our practice. So thank you, thank you, thank you so, so much. This was very enjoyable, and we hoped you enjoyed your time with us.
I had a blast. It was very, very fun. And I cannot wait to post about this on LinkedIn. And I hope all of you guys see the post and like the post and
I'm gonna
share the
post right
post
now.
in your, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so, so much, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Yosra and Oasis, for inviting me. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.